Hello, beautiful community. It's a privilege to be with you today. And we're going to talk a little bit, because it's been requested, about the sentence that Vladimir Karamurza has got. But this is really a conversation about the totalitarian progression of Putin's state. So let's give ourselves a little bit of a sort of flavor of what it means, and even relate it to the war. There is a latent civil war inside Russia. And it's latent and limited because most Russians aren't taking part in it. They are depoliticized, they are the blob in the middle we discuss. But there are 15, maybe 20% of the population in Russia who are coherently, clear-headedly against not just the war, but the causes of the war, the Putin regime. And they have representatives, which is the Russian opposition, which we sometimes analyze, praise, criticize. Vladimir Karamurza is one of their representatives. And part of the reason that the Ukraine war started, part of the reason that Putin invaded Ukraine, is to keep that civil war in Russia latent. Part of the reason innocent Ukrainians are dying, being displaced, and so on, is so that Mr. Karamurza and other people like him don't win. So that's the big political context. In terms of the machinery of repression, there is now a motor to totalitarian escalation that is independent of the Kremlin. This is new. It wasn't there 5 years ago. But there is a kind of motor whereby bits of Stalinist handling of particular situations will start emerging increasingly, and they won't be top down. But this is not the case with Mr. Karamurza. He got 25 years for made up stuff, fake news about the war, quote unquote, and treasonous statements about Russian military and so on. That's just made up stuff. The real reason he is in jail and he's got 25 years emotionally is that possibly his most prominent contribution has been that he acted as a kind of motor behind the Magnitsky sanctions that actually made him a very personal enemy of the state in Russia. So, and now that probably extends to all sanctions. You know, the Western sanctions have come our way, and you know who's responsible? Well, you know, one of the very earliest triggers is this guy. We're going to get him. We're going to give him 25 years. So I called Vladimir Karamurza Mr. Karamurza, but he is a young man. He's a few years, a few months younger than me. He is got a few special qualities. One of them is that he is an atypically consensual member of the Russian opposition. He is not got that bug whereby all of them quarrel with one another. That's a very good quality. And he is an enormously morally motivated person. That's to say that there's an element of expressive politics to why he put himself in quite as much danger as he did. In other words, with somebody like Mr. Navalny, the aspiration is to get rid of the Putin regime. Is this step that I can take going to get me closer to this outcome and then give me some kind of chance of being near power? And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but that's Navalny's motivation. It's completely pragmatic, you know. In my, and it's almost exhaustingly pragmatic. In other words, he thinks, well, I'm going to take this sip of coffee. If I take it, will that get me closer to being president or not? If it doesn't, I'm not going to take it, you know? Whereas Mr. Kara-Murza, I think, is in good part motivated by the idea that he finds something unconscionable and he might stand against it, that might have some symbolic meaning and symbolic consequence, but not consequence along the lines of, if I do this, it'll get that outcome, and then that outcome will lead to this outcome, and then that's going to happen in Russia, let's say. So he is more morally driven. But I think with all of the people who are getting huge sentences in Russia, there's also kind of shock, because I think that, I don't want to speak for Vladimir Kara-Murza himself here, but I think that with a lot of oppositional folks in Russia, they didn't realize that the pre-war sentences changed. You know, that a lot of people were sort of expecting 2 years here, 3 years there, and suddenly it's, you know, it's 10, 25. So that's a bit of a shock. And this raises questions, you know, what is more effective in principle? To have somebody like him out of prison, especially given the fact that at the moment the Russian opposition is struggling to realize its own task effectively. So it's surely missing a lot of the voices that have been disappeared by the Putin regime. So it would have been good to have him out. But then people who put their neck on the line like that and take extraordinary actions, I don't think you can tell them they did the wrong thing. You just have to respect their decision and wait for years, maybe even, you know, a decade or more, to see how it plays out and whether their gamble, as it were, is proven right by history. Is he going to be in jail for 25 years? No, he's not, because the sentence is irrelevant in the sense that he's there until the Putin regime goes, and that could be 3 years, it could be 13 years, you know. If anything, I would even say that if I'm him, I like 25 more than 15, because it simply raises his profile without adding anything of practical consequence to the sentence. The real issue for him is that he has experienced 2 poisonings a couple of years apart, similar to what Mr. Navalny experienced. And his health is precarious, very precarious indeed. He couldn't make it to the previous hearing he had in court. So I think that's more ominous a worry, you know, than the length of the sentence. So that's a little bit of the context. In terms of the motivations of the regime here, I do think that it comes from the top, as I say. I do think that it's possible that the exact number has been agreed by Mr. Putin, and that Mr. Putin chose a number for aesthetic reasons. This is Mr. Putin trying out, you know, his uncomfortable new Stalinist clothes. Now, when we say Stalinist clothes, we don't mean that the regime is becoming similar to the Soviet Union from that period. I don't think that's the right analogy. If anything, 1930s European fascism is a better analogy, but Stalinist in terms of scale of repression. That at least pointillistically, the Stalinist sentences are being reached for now, whereas they weren't before. So this comes right from the top. And yeah, there's going to be lots of motivations involved of a pragmatic kind, like, giving 25, does shut people up in Russia who might want to squeak something. And they would perhaps squeak if we went for 2 or 3 years, but 25 could shut them up a bit better. But actually, on top of the pragmatic motivations, there is, that bugger started this whole sanctions story against us. We're gonna get him. We're gonna get him. Let's get him, and let's get him in a sort of nice, with a nice round number, quarter of a century. So, I think that that's my sort of sense of the flavor of it. I'm slowly working still on a main channel video about imperialism among the Russian opposition, and it's looking like Thursday at the moment. I just spent the last 2 days of my own functional time, so that's of course a fraction of a full-time day for most people, but I spent 2 full-time days by my standards editing the first 2 minutes of that video. So that's gonna change. We're gonna have to make it a less refined product for the other 10-15 minutes of it. But really looking forward to sharing with you. Lots of love. Bye bye.